where does that come from? This idea that artists are, like, undeserving of money.
I don't know. I think it's this like bootstraps mentality that it's like unless you directly provided a service that is quantifiable, you know, like it's this I don't know, it's this predisposition against like soft skills, right? Like it needs to be tangible, right? Like it needs to be like a thing that was assigned a monetary value that you were then given, right? Like I'm going to fix the sink, and the sink was broken, and now it is fixed.
Now it works again.
Therefore, that is worth $100. That's like kind of the only services that are worthy of payment in those paradigms. But it's like there's nothing physically different about somebody when they like walk into a music venue and then walk out. There's nothing physically different about somebody when they walk into therapy and then walk out.
Right.
So, like, you can't look at it and quantify it. It's a little bit harder to describe. So, to a lot of people, they're like, oh, so that's worthless. That has no value. I don't know. Like,
yeah, that's interesting. The quantifiable part definitely makes sense. Because we do like to be able to measure things, and, like, we have this idea of getting a return on our investment or something.
Yeah. It's this very, like, capitalistic view of, like, you know, like, 100 apples can feed me for, you know, X number of days. And so that, yeah, sure, that's worth $100. But like, how many days did hiring a musician feed me? Oh, so there's no way that was worth $300. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's so strange because, like, yes, absolutely. We
in middle school, like maybe end of grade 5, start of grade 6. My older brother had just enrolled in an arts high school, Etobicoke School of the Arts, and I was just hitting middle school, so I was starting to think about where I might want to go to high school, and I had like watched him like learn how to play the clarinet, so I learned about what it meant to practice, what it meant to like work on an instrument by watching him do it. I was like, oh, that sounds fun, and it's a way to not go to high school in Rexdale where I'm like not having a great time because I'm like getting bullied. I'm like this odd man out, kind of wasn't having a great time in Rexdale for like, and I had my own issues, right? Like I was an ADHD kid. I was getting in fights all the time, causing trouble,
bonking into walls.
And yeah, so I started then, and band class was at the same time as French class. So I was missing French class, and my like mom saw right through it. She's like, that's a scam. You're just trying to skip French class. If you're going to do this, you're going to take it seriously. I'm putting you in lessons. You're doing RCM exams like from the beginning. So by the time I got to grade 9, I like had already kind of established like a base level of seriousness about the craft, right? Like I was studying with this woman, Kathy Stone, who like subs in with the Canadian Opera Company, like professional classical trombonist. And she was like, this thing doesn't get better by itself, right? Like you need to focus, you know, like anytime she saw me, you know, losing focus in a lesson or something, she'd be like, okay, stop, take a deep breath, play the most beautiful F that you've ever played in your life, you know. And it was this like, I didn't realize it at the time, but she was teaching me a mindset.
That's so interesting.
Not so much the technical skills of the instrument.
Right, and like teaching you to feel and to like take in the moment. So trombone was your first instrument?
I was playing euphonium.
Oh, cool.
Which is just a little tuba.
Cool.
And then I just when I was about to audition for ESA,
you have to audition to get in.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a public school,
right?
But you have to audition.
So it's
because it's the difference between that program and a normal public high school in Toronto is you have to take all of the same classes that you would take to get your normal high school diploma, but you also have to take 2 extra courses every year.
Oh, interesting.
So they make sure that like you have to write an essay and like you have to.
No, that makes sense. My sister went to a sports school in Ottawa, where it's like you would be doing your sport all afternoon, but then you'd have extra courses in the mornings.
Yeah, so they just want to make sure that kids are going to be able to handle the extra load, because they don't want people like failing to get their diploma on account of they chose this arts high school when they were 13, and then they can't get into university because it was too much for them or something.
have, of course, like people who are really, 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 like, what's the word? Virtuoso. You can be a virtuoso at something, and that can be your focus. But I find a lot of musicians are musicians. Like, they don't have a specific instrument that is theirs. At least, like, in my experience of being around spaces with musicians the last, like, 5 years. It's like everyone can play a couple things, is dabbling in all this, and it's like, is it fair to say that each instrument has a different way of expressing a feeling, maybe?
Yeah,
like,
there's different, like, roles that you would play, right? So there's different personality types, I think, that are like suited to certain instruments, right? Like, if you're the type of person who needs to be the star of the show, you're probably not going to have a ton of fun being like the stereotypical bass player, right? Because your job as the bass player is to support everybody. You're the floor. Nobody really can hear you unless they're keyed in to that frequency, you know. And like the trombone, like if you're in a hurry to get a lot of information out, then you're probably going to have a bad time because you can't say shit on the trombone for 5 to 10 years. It's like there's a huge technical barrier between like comfortable music making and the musician on that instrument. Different things. Also, this idea of like everybody being a multi-instrumentalist is interesting to me because that's something I kind of only caught on to in my adulthood. Like, I really thought that it was weird to play multiple instruments because that's the idea you get in like this classical music education system. You're like, you play your one instrument and you get awesome at that. And then like the older I got, I started to enter the real world of, you know, the craft of music making, like being just a good proprietor of music. And I looked around and all the people I respected as musicians and who seemed to have the most to say seemed to be able to say it on just about anything they picked up. You know, so I was already calling myself a professional trombonist before I even started learning the piano in any serious way, and that was my second instrument.
Interesting.
There used to be a time where you could pay your rent just being a live trumpet performer. Right. Or like you could be just an arranger. All I do is take songs written by other people and I like change the notes around a little bit, and I like, or like you could be just an orchestrator, you know, like I work with orchestral composers and I like, you know, voice out their string parts, you know, and that was a whole ass job. But like now it's really not. It's you need to be able to do multiple things just to make enough to pay rent.
Was there like a moment when you were growing up where you were like, I want to be a professional musician?
I don't think so. I have always kind of seen my path through music as like a series of next obvious choices. Right. Like
I like that.
I started on euphonium, and then the obvious next choice was to learn the trombone because it seemed like that would be more impressive for the audition. And then in grade 10, there was like some like all-city youth big band thing that needed trombone players, and like a couple people told me I should audition, so it seemed obvious that I should audition. And then I did that, and then half the players there were doing the Humber Community School, so it seemed obvious that I should do that so I could keep up with the people I was around. And then because I'd already been around Humber College, I'd been like kind of seen the work ethic, I was doing it, and also my marks were shit except for music. Like I had like 90s in music and then like 65s across the board. So I'm like, right? Seems pretty obvious that I should go into music because that's the thing that is seeming to get me a good return on my like work investment. Like I didn't even practice until probably 12th grade because that was kind of when I saw that like I was having a good time. Like I was getting a good, I hate this term return on investment. But I was getting a lot back for, I was getting a lot of traction. Let's say that.
When you're asked to speak about yourself, you're like, but as soon as you're given a horn, you're telling 1,000 stories. Where do you think that impulse comes from, like for you to tell stories, but particularly like through music?
I think that the impulse is something that's inherent in people, and the music is just a vehicle that I've become used to using for that, right? Like, I don't know, I fumbled around with poetry when I was a teenager. If I'd maybe had better motor function, maybe I would have been an artist. But I just don't. My hands aren't very flexible. But I think that just people have stories to tell, and I was lucky I was given the opportunity to learn how to tell those stories from an early age. You will never, ever find a recording of John Coltrane like saying, I play jazz music.
Right?
You know?
What do you call jazz? What do you call jazz?
I call it Black American music.
Cool. Okay.
This is a term that was popularized by Nick Payton, who's a New Orleans trumpet player. And I think that is a good term because it gives context to this continuum of music that goes straight from like New Orleans brass band music to like ragtime to like swing music to, you know, combo jazz, bebop, whatever you want to call that, to like funk music in the 70s and 80s to hip hop to R&B, like whatever is on the radio now. It's a straight lineage of music. And the genre titles can obscure that, right? Like if you say hip hop and jazz, it sounds like it's two completely different genres. And on its surface, it's hard to hear that it's the same thing. But if you listen to the rhythmic structures and the mythology around it, and just like the idea of like you introduce a theme and then everybody gets their turn to like say what they have to say on the matter, and then you return to the theme. That's a jazz form. That's head in, solo, 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 head out. Or it's verse, you know, somebody's verse, somebody's verse, somebody's verse, the chorus, you know?
Oh, that's I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's this idea of making something like that's greater than the sum of all parts by playing to everybody's strengths, right? There's no expectation that everybody is this like faceless, invisible member of the team. There's a ton of room for individuality, but it is in service of the greater goal.
No, there's something really powerful about that. About the fact that it, like, yes, you can, of course, make music on your own, but how important the collective is and how important it is to recognize that everyone has their strengths and play to them.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. And it's something I've noticed even just seeing the way different musicians play with each other in different groups and how there are different languages you guys can speak with each other that that definitely aren't English.
Yeah, I think of like genre as language, or at least dialect, right? Like, like you have, like you can learn how to play the trombone, but the skill set and the inflections required to play like classical trombone are completely different from like say Cuban trombone,
right?
And like the same rhythmic piece of information. Like if I go da 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 da, that's gonna sound like a completely different emotion, a completely different piece of information, depending on what the drum beat behind it is, depending on what's going on, right? So it's like important to, just like immerse yourself in these different dialects of music that are happening.
That's so interesting.
Like if you spend time around somebody, their inflections, their accent almost rubs off on you, right? Like if I spent a year playing with any particular musician, I will come out of that year sounding a little bit more like them.
Oh, cool.
And I have no choice in the matter. Yeah. The same as if I spend a year living with certain roommates, I'm going to sound more like them. My views are going to shift towards theirs.
I bet that's especially like powerful here in Toronto. What was the first band you were in?
The first band I was in? I tried to start a few bands in high school. Yeah. Never really happened. I would say Art the Band was the first band that I was in that really, we booked shows.
And that was like based on people from Humber or from high school?
That was from high school.
Cool.
Yeah, I met Sean Clary at community school, the Humber Community School on Saturdays. And then he invited me to do like some improvised thing at a loft on King Street. And then I guess I passed the audition. We improvised for 20 minutes in front of some people. And he's like, cool, I'm trying to start a band.
Oh shit!
And it started as this like punky jazz quartet. It was not so clean and nice as what you may have seen when we met at Alchemy, because that was a few years on. It was more of a punk band. We had a metal drummer.
Oh, cool.
I was playing a lot louder.
And full instrumental though, like no singing.
Full instrumental.
And then he put it together and he started booking gigs.
Well, we all kind of did. Like we started writing together.
Cool.
Basically,
like literally like writing out songs.
Yeah, like we would just jam and try to find an idea that we liked and we'd expand on it. So like, there's one song we have like 647.
And you were doing this in high school.
Yeah.
You were like
We're just sitting in his basement.
Yeah.
And just playing for a few hours, and like we might get half a song written. We were really chipping away at it.
Whoa.
We didn't totally know what we were doing at the time.
No, but you were like, let's do this.
Yeah. And that was kind of my first experience of like being myself.
Right.
On
cool.
the trombone.
Okay.
Because up until that point, I'd always been, reading sheet music. I was like, I am trying to correctly play these notes
according to like this standard and like this way of playing.
Yeah.
To like, get like to at least like not fuck up in class or like not fuck up while,
Yeah, like I would be playing some jazz standards in community school on a Saturday morning, and I'm like, I am trying to play the right notes for 32 bars, and then I will get to the end of my chorus, and then it will be somebody else's turn, and I will try to count the form and not get lost in time to play the melody correctly. That was my...
And that feels very robotic.
It was robotic.
Yeah.
And it was a problem because I didn't sound very good yet.
But like do you find it was helpful to have gone through that process of like, no?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You got to suck before you're good.
Yeah.
They don't do a good... In the system of music education we have right now, it is not made explicit enough to the children that they are going to sound like shit for 5 to 10 years compared to any recording they have of somebody playing the same instrument. Because people don't make recordings. You don't find a CD on the shelf of an amateur musician.
No, you don't.
It's hard to... And we don't have like a live music culture unless you're raised in a musical household where people are playing music and you have this like up close experience of the back or the behind the scenes work, right? The process of learning music, the process of like living in it. You only see the finished product, and anything else can be really discouraging.
How did you process that experience of discouragement?
I think I just beat my head against the wall on it and eventually got less discouraged.
Yeah.
I processed it as I went.
Right.
I remember a distinct moment in probably third year university where I'd been calling myself a professional trombonist for probably 4 years at that point, and I wasn't. But
that was part of your identity.
That was my identity. That was what I built up. And then one day I picked up the horn and I'm warming up, and I'm like, oh, you know what? Every time I play the instrument nowadays, it sounds like somebody who is trained to play the instrument playing it. And before that point, it didn't. It was a crapshoot. Like 25% of the time, if the day wasn't right, if I hadn't warmed up right, to an untrained ear, it sounded like an actual child playing the instrument. And I'd been playing for almost 10 years at that point.
Right. And like, to kind of bring myself into understanding this, when you're a musician, even just as a kid, you're an audiophile. That's kind of like how you start on this path, right? Is you enjoy sounds through your ears and you enjoy making sounds. So as someone who's already got an ear for it, who's now learning how to create sounds a variety of ways himself, you're so attuned to how you sound. Like you can't really delude yourself necessarily between what you sound like and then what something professional sounds like. Am I correct? Or
yes and no. I think
okay.
It's easy to delude yourself.
Okay.
I still fight with the self-delusion all the time, right? Because you're only ever hearing it from inside yourself.
Yeah.
So it's easy to like, oh, I missed that note, but that doesn't matter.
Right.
Oh, I missed that, but that doesn't matter. But everybody's listening to the whole thing. It all matters. It's all part of the message. But the more kind of mature I got, I guess, the more I learned that is just part of it, and you're never gonna, perfectly execute what you're trying to do.
Right.
And you don't have to. Nobody expects flawless execution. And in fact, flawless execution can be a drag. You know, that can, if you're prioritizing execution over expression, then you're going to have more execution than expression.
Right. And it's not going to sound natural.
Like, we've all had that experience of, like, going to some jazz club and there's some fucking dude, like, playing a lot, but it doesn't really sound, like, it doesn't really connect. It doesn't really say anything.
Doesn't feel.
Yeah. And we've also all had that experience of you're listening to some music and somebody just goes, "What?" And everybody freaks out, right? Like, there's a ton of information there's flying around, and then there's a moment of calmness. There's, like, one thing. And that is hard to do, and it is it's hard to evaluate from inside yourself, right? Like, and if it's coming from a place of evaluation, like, you can't, like, build up to that moment in a dishonest way. You can't be like, "Oh, I'm gonna get them with the whole note in 16 bars. They're gonna fucking love it." It'll never land if you were trying to do it. It's like you find yourself playing the note and you're like, "Oh fuck, I can't stop playing this note yet. This is still the right note. It's still better to stay here." Like, that's always how that happens. It never happens like, "I'm just gonna fucking do it. I'm gonna wait," or else you sound like Kenny G. Right? Because we've all, like, Kenny G does that. He's like, "Oh, about 10 minutes into the concert, I'm gonna hold a note for 30 seconds, and they're all gonna freak out."
Does it need to be organic? Like for you, it does, but like
for me, it does. Yeah. But I don't know, like, because there's also something nice in seeing, like, a routine,
like an arranged routine. Because, like, hey, we've been doing this way for 300 years. We know that this sounds great, so we're going to keep doing it this way. It's an interesting thing, actually, like, between, like, tradition and, like, experimentation. Do you find you come up against tradition sometimes when you're playing? Like, how much experimentation do you feel you can do?
I used to experiment too much. I was really, I find that the further I get along this path, the more I'm like, nah, a little more tradition, please. Like,
what makes you say that you experimented too much? Like, what do you mean by that?
I think I was thinking a few steps ahead.
Okay.
For a while. Like, I thought that I had more figured out than I did, so I was trying to do more than I could. I distinctly recall a moment when I was 17, walking through the park near my house, and thinking to myself, I think I have everything technically together that I'll ever need on the trombone. I can play up to about a D. I can play pretty fast. So it's all musicality from here on out. I just need to think about theory and, like, pitch.
God bless teenagers.
I really thought that shit. And that was before I even got to Humber. That was like, I was an actual child, and I was thinking childlike thoughts.
Do you remember your first gig?
My very first gig? My first gig ever, I would say, was at Siesta Nouveau. I'd gone to a band camp. I'd gone to NMC. And a friend of mine, like a friend that I'd made at that camp, had, like, a post-rock band.
So it's like, American Pie jokes aside, band camp is, like, a legit thing and a foundational experience?
It was foundational because it was my first time meeting a bunch of other, like, serious musicians.
Neat.
As much as you can call a bunch of teenagers serious musicians.
No, but it's like, you're at home doing your thing, or you're with your homies doing whatever, but then you're suddenly in a place with people who are all there for the same reason, which is we all play music.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I made a friend there, and he's like, "Oh, we got a gig at the Smiling Buddha. Why don't you come?"
Buddha, fuck.
Or not the Smiling Buddha, sorry, the Siesta Nouveau. It was at Siesta Nouveau, which is a torn-down venue. It's going to be condos now.
That is Toronto for you.
Yep. Real fun. But I was asked to just come sit in with this band, and they're like, yeah, just play. It's in B minor. I'll point at you when it's time to play, and you improvise until you're done, and then we'll move on. And that was the first time that I was ever... I would say that was my first gig because it was the first time that I was asked to show up as Nick Marshall.
Right.
You know, they wanted me, not a trombone player.
And you were asked to improvise.
Yeah.
That's a really important thing, actually, is like what your expectations for success are as an artist. Like, is that a conversation you have with yourself? Do you, like, how do you think about success as an artist?
That is a good question.
Right?
I don't know. I don't know what I would call success as an artist. Because that is constantly changing. I think 5 years ago, what I'm doing now may have looked like success to me. And now it doesn't. Now, well, I feel successful. Like, I feel like I've acquired a full adult life, and all of it has been bought with music. You know, I've never had a real job, per se.
Yeah, the way you put that, I think, is really measured. To kind of, like, reevaluate what success is to you as you're changing as a person.
Yeah. I would say that at this point, success to me is just to be a good purveyor of music. You know? And I'm not really sure what that entails, but I know that if I just put my head down and I do the work, then it'll happen. You know, like I've learned to trust the hours that I've put in. I used to have this imposter syndrome of, you know, I'm like, oh, they're going to see through me. They're going to realize that I didn't do the homework, that I'm actually not good enough to be here. You know, they're going to realize that I don't know how to play this music. So that's when you catch yourself doing the impression instead of being yourself.
Right.
And the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that I only succeed when I try to be myself.
How did you overcome that feeling of imposterdom?
I'll let you know.
Because it still happens sometimes,
right? Yeah, it still happens.
Like, you'll get up on stage and you're, like, not thinking about it, but then there's, like, moments where you're like, how am I the guy doing this?
I don't think I overcome it. I think I've just learned to put myself in situations where I don't have to do that.
Interesting.
Right? Like, during the pandemic, I started booking the Nick Marshall Trio, the Nick Marshall Quintet. I started doing
so more stuff for you.
Wish Tank, which was my project. You know, and I've realized that is easier for me. It's harder in terms of, like, the mental energy I have to put into it, but it's easier in terms of whatever mental energy I put into it is going to be the right answer, because there's nobody else who's going to be like, no, I didn't like that.
Because you're doing your project. So, like, in a sense, the trick is to keep challenging yourself with, like, new ways of expressing. But also, like, new ways of being, where, like, normally you're part of a group. Now you're like, now I'm going to front a group. I'm going to put my name on it, too. Yeah. You're going to take a bit more ownership, which, like, you know, through one lens could raise the stakes, but through another, it just, like, keeps challenging you to try different things.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the challenge is to think of something else to do, not to execute the thing I'm doing.
Like, how does your family quantify your success as a musician?
I do not ask. I don't want to know, because it's probably not as charitable as I think it is.
Oh, no, it's like my old man until a few years ago would say to me, like, hey, Rashidi, how much longer you do this thing? And, like, he wouldn't even refer to it by name. And I'm like, wait, you mean work at bars and restaurants so I can write stuff?
Yeah.
But for him, it's like, what do you, like this thing you do? That's like, just, he doesn't have a way of understanding it. Yeah. I want to circle back to one thing real quick. You're talking about being in school and being in these rooms, and they're telling you about these theories, and, like, when you're outside in the real world being a professional. Could you maybe speak to, like was there a dissonance between what they were telling you and what the reality of, like once you're out of school, it was like, okay, Definitely. All right, kid, go make some money now. You got rent to pay.
Yeah, for sure. Like, because you're taking a music business course in Humber.
They give you business courses.
Oh yeah, it's a good business course too.
Yeah. What do they tell you?
Tons of shit. They tell you how to do your taxes.
Oh wow,
that's nice.
That's helpful.
big hint for the prospective professional musicians in the audience. Your clothes are a business expense. You're a performer. That's wardrobe.
Ooh. Ooh.
Expense every sweater.
Ooh.
Stuff like that, like useful tips and tricks. But also they were talking about like what the wage is, right? And they're
really?
like, the union rate is like
Union?
whatever it is, $150 an hour or something. The union rates have not been the actual rates in the city for 20 years. And like I would say that was where the dissonance came in. The teachers at all of the music institutions in Toronto are 20 years more established than their students. So
Right.
Those institutions are a great place to learn how to be a professional musician 20 years ago.
Right.
And they always will be. It's inherent to having
That's
an
inherent to
institution of a
education.
living craft,
Yeah.
right? And it's not a problem. It's not like they're lying to you when they tell you what worked for them.
Knowledge is good, but
It's I think people don't really understand that when they show up there, and sometimes you'll have people who are disappointed when they leave
right.
music school and they do everything that their teachers told them to do, and suddenly there's not a career for them
Right.
because they had to find their own way and they missed that part.
Right. Because for you already knew. You already knew before you went to music school.
Yeah.
From your experience in high school, like, oh, this is what a musician does. This is like potentially you might get a little bit of money. That's cool.
Yeah,
You
and
guys-
I was really doing on-the-job training
yeah,
before. Like I ended up taking 7 years to do my undergrad
yeah,
because I was already doing some gigging in second year.
right,
I was playing in a busking brass band, and like I missed the first 2 weeks of January in second year because we had a gig in Dubai. I was trying to do the thing before I was done learning how to do the thing, which was good because I think I had a better idea of what the actual job was than
Yeah.
most of my peers at school. But it also meant that I had one foot in the professional music world and one foot as a music student, so I was half-assing both things.
Oh.
And I was really trying to do both things.
and it's like the practical knowledge you got from
Mm-hmm.
experiencing gigs and experiencing being a musician before school made you able, like, there were still things from school you cherry picked out that you're like, oh, this is helpful, and you only knew that because you were gigging.
Yeah.
So it's almost like one thing kind of does come before the other in a way, where it's like you might want to try it out a bit, see what it feels like, and then if this is really what you want to do, hop into the institution and get that institutional knowledge,
Yeah.
if that's how your brain works.
Yeah, I think you just need to be realistic about what they're teaching you, what you're trying to learn.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, and you just need to give it your whole focus, right? The amount of information that they are giving you at a university is too much to be doing the job at the same time.
Yes.
It's designed that way. They have budgeted out their hypothetical students' time, and they didn't leave any for actually doing the job at the same time because they don't think you're going to be doing that. So you're going to fail both things. Like that's the thing that I was frustrated about. Was not only did I fail a lot of music courses, I think I blew a lot of great musical contacts because I fucked up these gigs. I was a 19-year-old who thought he was better than he was at music, and I would show up unprepared to stuff. I would show up late to stuff. I didn't totally get the level of seriousness that was required in this craft. And this is something that's kind of come to me later, is this, like, music is a very deep, cultural thing that humans do, and I have kind of incorporated this religious fervor into my craft over the past couple years, where it's like I don't go to church and I don't do, I don't have that in my life, and that's like a state of motivation that is really powerful, and music is a great way to access that, and I wasn't taking advantage of that until after I'd graduated, I think.
And it's now something that is who you are and kind of propels you forward through life
Yeah.
in an exciting way.
Yeah, it's like a resting state, I'm sitting in this desert full of music, and anytime I feel anxious and I'm like, where am I going? Then I can just kind of idly dig and get closer to the truth of the matter. And it doesn't really matter if I never get to the bottom. I can relieve my stress. I can.
Just by digging. That's all you need to do.